Welcome to this week's favourite Sunday sermon. Tumultuous. Wow. What does it mean? Noisy, confused, disorderly. I think it's fair to say that's a good description of the week in politics that we've just experienced. Yes, it kicked off on Monday with the removal by the Prime Minister of his Home Secretary, a Brexiteer, someone who was robustly determined to reduce immigration and to stop the boats. He appointed David Cameron back into the cabinet, a Remainer, having lost a Brexiteer. Tuesday, she gets her revenge with a bombshell letter attacking the Prime Minister for misleading not only her, but more importantly, the British people. Wednesday, the Prime Minister's Rwanda plan that the former Home Secretary had said he had got wrong and hadn't had a plan B. It's in tatters. It's over. Yes, the Supreme Court have ruled that it's unlawful. The Prime Minister didn't have a plan B. All of these things would be a huge week in politics. But if you think that's bad enough, that actually was just the beginning, because we had votes in the House of Commons, amendments as to whether or not the government in the UK should be calling for a ceasefire. 10 front bench resignations in the Labour Party over that vote and the stance of the Leader of the Opposition. Protests ever more aggressive and violent in Parliament Square. These extreme pro-Hamas supporters targeting the cenotaph, as if you had thought the police would have learnt the lesson from the previous weekend. In those protests, Wednesday night, attacking journalists, attacking camera crew from GB News. Shocking abuse. This, so much worse than when it all started on the first demonstration on October the 9th. You might be thinking, what's going on? If you thought that was bad, it got worse. Thursday, we had the unbelievable sight in the United Kingdom of schoolchildren being given time off from school to go to demonstrate outside an MP's office in East London. And what they were doing? They were chanting a genocidal, horrific song, chanting from the river to the sea. These children were being used as political pawns here in the United Kingdom for events in the Middle East. Those children will have had no idea of the implications of that anti-Semitic chant. But that's where we've got to. That's what happens if you allow extremism to flourish. Just think about the consequences of where this goes. So that's just school children out of one school in one community in East London. But how many other dozens, hundreds of schools with significant numbers of Muslim children, that could also have Jewish children in the same school? Do you see what's happening here? We run the risk of allowing children to be pitted against each other here in the United Kingdom due to a conflict in the Middle East. And that this pitting of them against each other is almost encouraged, is allowed by the teachers, the head teachers in that school. It's an outrageous failure of leadership. It's an absolute dereliction of leadership. It's also a serious breach of safeguarding within these schools. If we don't nip this in the bud now, it will flourish throughout schools across our towns and our cities. It's truly shocking. We know we've got the boss of the Met Police, Sir Mark Rowley. I've been pretty critical of him for what I think is weak leadership. He's been calling on the government to bring in new extremism laws. Well, maybe that's exactly what they should do. The Prime Minister this week talked about emergency legislation on Rwanda. I tell you what, Prime Minister, we need some urgent legislation on this rise in extremism. If the Met Police boss is calling for it, if he's not able, in his view, to stop these protests, then something must be done. We cannot descend into a situation where up and down our country, our school children are being pitted against each other, are being given time off from school to go and demonstrate singing genocidal, anti-Semitic chants. It's totally unacceptable. It's got to stop. Prime Minister, enough is enough. Get a grip, show some leadership. This is an urgent law that needs passing, even before the Rwanda legislation. Because otherwise, I fear these protests, they're going to get more violent, more abusive, journalists, cameras being attacked. We see this elsewhere in the world and we think, thank heavens that couldn't happen here in the United Kingdom. It's happening here, folks. It's bad, and we ain't seen the worst yet. It's time for serious, grown-up, bold, courageous leadership. And with that, here endeth this week's Sunday sermon.